Before you do any scanning, the first thing that you'll need to do is calibrate your camera and your light. This will create a preset that you can use many times over for that specific camera and light coupling. I'm going to show you how to calibrate a few different systems. So we have a ring flash and a DSLR. We have an LED cube, a point and shoot style camera, and we also have a smartphone and its built-in flash. In addition to those items, you're also going to need a color card, and specifically we're interested in the gray side. And you'll also need a ruler or some form of tape measure to measure the distance. Commonly, when you calibrate a camera, you're only just calibrating its exposure and the white balance. But what we'll be doing today is calibrating the exposure settings for a given distance. And this is really important because as you're scanning an object, you're likely to be scanning it from some near positions and some far positions. And as you move in and out, the brightness of that flash is going to change. And because our light and our camera are coupled together, as we move the camera in close, the image gets very bright. And as we move the camera far away, the image gets dark. So when we do a calibration, it's really important that we actually measure what this distance is. So when we do the photogrammetry solve and run the data through Marso, we can accommodate for this change in brightness and essentially nullify it. So you won't see any of this changing in brightness throughout the scan, and you get perfectly uniform, diffuse or base color. So first thing that we're going to want to do is try and identify what good exposure is. We want to make sure that we try and preserve as much of the reflected light as possible. So this means anything that's very shiny, like a metal, doesn't clip our highlights. We want to make sure that there's some detail within those white parts of the image, and they're not just completely set to one, or there's no information that you can pull out of that image. So to find a good exposure setting, I'm going to take a picture of this shoe, as well as this ruler. And the reason I'm picking this metal ruler is because it's very glossy, and it's going to reflect an awful lot of the light. And I'm trying to make sure I don't burn out any of those highlights. And I'm going to take a photograph and see how that picture looks. Now that picture is very bright. I reckon that's going to burn out some of my highlights. So I'm just going to bring the brightness of this ring flash down a tad, increase the aperture. That looks better, but I can probably go even lower. Okay, so that image looks pretty good. Seems to be maintaining a lot of the highlights, and there's a lot of information still within the shadows. Now, because we're doing this in a lit environment, I want to make sure that there's no impact of this ambient lighting affecting my calibration image. So one way I can easily do that is just by turning off my flash, keeping the same exposure settings in the camera, and taking another image. That image is completely black, so it means that none of this ambient lighting is really affecting this image, or not to the extent that it's going to throw off our calibration. Now, it's worth noting that when you are taking an image for calibration, you want to be shooting at the distance that you conventionally capture from. So this handheld rig, we're usually about 40 to 60 centimeters away. If I was going to be doing scans like this, I wouldn't do the same exposure setting as I would for this distance, primarily because those highlights are going to burn out differently. The same is true if I was going to be capturing an image from this distance. We would want to use very different exposure settings. Now that we have established what a good exposure setting is for this particular camera and light, we want to take a picture of our grey card. So the easiest way that you can do a calibration is to actually put your grey card next to the object that you're going to be scanning. Making sure that we have the same exposure settings that we picked just then, and shooting from about the same distance. And what I'm going to do is measure the distance between my grey card and my light source. So that's about 60 centimeters. Just going to hold that there and take a picture. And that is really all that we need. Once you have Marso open, go to File, Settings. That will open another dialog window. Exposure parameters. Create a new exposure. We're going to give it a meaningful name. Open that image that we just took. 60 centimeters was how far we measured, and we used a 50% grey. If this preview is too dark, you can use W and S on the keyboard to brighten it, but this won't have any impact on your exposure. Draw a bounding box over this region, the bigger the better, and then hit enter on the keyboard. Once complete, you can click on the image to see the before and after, and if you're happy, hit enter. This will appear at the bottom of your exposure parameter list, so click on it and hit save, and then hit save again. That exposure profile is now active in the main Marso window. I'm now going to do the same thing but using a smartphone. The kind of distance that I usually capture from, about 30 centimeters, and we're just going to take a picture. And it really is that easy. Now, the only other piece of information we'll need to know is where the light source is relative to the center of the camera. Now, these are three very different types of light sources, and we measure them slightly differently. When it comes to the ring flash, it doesn't really have a position on this axis because it is a circle and it's quite centered in the frame, so we don't need to measure this distance. But what we will want to do is measure how far away that light source is from the middle of the camera. So taking out my ruler again, we're going to measure from the middle of the camera to the front of the light source, and that's coming out to be about 15 centimeters. Take a note of this, and we'll put this into the Marso application later on. For this setup, where the light source is mounted on the hot shoe, it's centered along this axis, but it is offset somewhat from the center of the camera. So measuring this distance here, from the center of the lens up towards the light, we're getting about 9 centimeters. In the Marso software, we always use landscape as our up direction. So even if you have your camera in portrait, we'll presume that this direction is up, and this will still be 9 centimeters. If you're unsure of what to do, we have a few different examples on our wiki that you can look through. Same as before, File, Settings. Now we want to go to the light system. And you'll see a little window here, which is a 3D representation. Our coordinate system is Y up. So our light was about 9 centimeters. So on the Y axis, it's 9 centimeters. We'll add this light into our scene, and we can now see this light appearing. So that looks correct. We'll give this a name. I'm just going to call this tutorial. Make sure that's selected, save it, and then save again. And finally, the smartphone. This light is so close to the lens that we can kind of ignore it. We don't have to worry about measuring this light. So for this, you can just set everything to 0. Very easy. If you're looking to use the same camera and light configuration, such as this one, for small objects and big objects, it's likely that you're going to want to create multiple calibration profiles for the different exposure settings that you come up with. You're more than welcome to do this, provided you give them meaningful names within Marso, and then you can select which preset you want to use when you go and run your scan.